Hello, and welcome to the official podcast of the Cleveland International Film Festival, SIF Speaks, sponsored by Wayside Furniture. I'm Dee Perry, and I'm joined by my producer and co-host, Aaron Spears. And Aaron, we've talked about some really interesting short and feature-length documentaries on this podcast since the film festival began on April 7th.
Very true, Dee, but on this particular episode, we're going to switch it up a little bit and showcase an award-winning narrative feature titled LORELEI. Joining us to discuss that film is the writer and director, Sabrina Doyle. Sabrina, the screenplay you wrote for LORELEI about a biker from Oregon who is in jail for 15 years and how his life unfolds when he reconnects with an old love, including her children, which are new to him. What was it about the story that compelled you to bring it to the screen?
Yeah, I wanted to tell a blue-collar story because that's my personal background. I'm a first-generation high school graduate, first-generation college graduate. My family are what you traditionally call, I suppose, manual, unskilled workers, which I think is a misnomer because there is skill in the work. But anyway, the point is that I grew up knowing
Sure.
what financial hardship was and what it's like to sort of lack a comfort zone. And I feel that, if you haven't grown up hard up, that when you tackle sort of working class issues, even films that I see that are very acclaimed, sometimes I find myself feeling that they're either verging on poverty porn or they romanticize hardship and make it noble, or they put their characters through so much kind of suffering that it's verging on sadism almost. So,
Yeah.
I just wanted to make a film that shows the highs and the lows and, above all, the kind of the resilience and the fight and the dream life of my characters. And I wanted to make a film also about second chances because I think, in such a social media driven, success driven culture, we don't really talk about our failures enough and the importance of persistence and resilience. And the other thing that I was keen to sort of dig into with this movie was the issue of what I've sort of ended up calling toxic nostalgia, which is sort of this feeling that the past was somehow better than the present. Because I think it's only really in letting go of the past, the could have, the what should have beens, the could have beens, this idea of what your life could and should have been, and embracing really change and embracing children in this film because in this film, children represent the future. It's only sort of in embracing that Wayland is able to reclaim his life rather than live in the shadow of the past. And, that when I started writing this in 2016, that felt important because of everything that was happening in the world, and, at home in my native UK, we had people voting for Brexit, which is kind of, wanting to restore Britain to its former greatness. And I think, there was similar sentiments emerging here in the US as well. So I think that theme is a sort of subtle underlying theme in the film. And it's not played out on a big, level. It's played out on a sort of more intimate, familial level. But I think that was a good way of getting into it. And, my funding for this film, and when you talk about indie films, funding is such an important piece of that. My funding was contingent on making a story about a stepfather because our executive producer, Arnold Zimmerman, who funded the film or most of the film, is a stepfather to 4 children who are not his biological children. And he says it's the hardest and most worthwhile thing he's ever done. And he felt that he'd never kind of seen that version of masculinity in a film before. And so he wanted to fund a film about that. So he and I sort of met and got on and kind of decided to work together on this, but I had to find my way into that story. And it wasn't necessarily sort of straightforward for me. It wasn't necessarily the story that I would have told for my first feature. So I had to find my way into it, and it was a process. But the breakthrough for me came when I watched Paris, Texas, the Wim Wenders film, in which Harry Dean Stanton plays this kind of lost father who's able to redeem himself many years after screwing things up really badly. And, his version of masculinity and fatherhood and the American dream is kind of bruised and it's tender and it grows out of heartbreak and forgiveness. And that was how I found myself into LORELEI and into that story.
And it's a really engaging film. I'm not even sure if that's the right word, but it drew me in right from the beginning because you open with shots of a woman underwater. And went into it with a blank slate. So I didn't know if it was going to turn into a murder mystery or something else. And then a little bit later, I realized she's one of the film's central characters, Dolores. What appealed to you about starting with the image of her underwater?
I've always loved this idea of bookends in cinema. So you start the film in one place with an image, and then you end the film with a very similar image, but something really significant about it has shifted and is different. And so, at the end of the film, without giving too much away, Dolores ends the film underwater. I'm just going to give it away. Transfigured into a mermaid, a kind of sea goddess, and living a dream that she'd put to one side to raise children. So it made sense, at the beginning of the film, to show her sort of coiled up in the fetal position, as if underwater, as if in utero, in the womb, and like she's gestating, like she hasn't come into her own yet. And that it's through her reuniting with Wayland and him making space for her and her dream that she's finally reborn and she gets the chance to reinvent herself. So thematically, I think that image says so much, and it kind of also ties in really directly with the image at the end of the film, the final closing images of the film.
Well, that opening also, it's directly followed by a scene of Wayland being released from prison. And we were noticing repeating kind of color palette already just in those first couple of scenes. And to me, like, the color seemed very strong. Obviously, you have like the gorgeous landscape of the Pacific Northwest, but a lot of like greens and aquamarines and blue.
So gorgeous.
Yeah. Could you kind of talk about how you were using playing around with light and colors throughout the narrative?
Yeah, so that misty look from that scene, of that opening scene. So after the underwater scene, we have a scene of Wayland getting out of prison after 15 years. And that misty look, the whole scene is shrouded in mist, was what we wanted the entire film to look like, because it's melancholy and it speaks to the past and it speaks to nostalgia, and there's something sad about it. But also really because mist is kind of water vapor, and it reflects the theme of water, of something. And water in this film for me is, represents something shifting, something moving. So that was the plan, to have the whole film look like that. And then as it turned out, we shot in the fall, and we expected mist the whole time. We shot, but it was just we shot in October, November, and it was just an unusually good fall. And so much of the film is actually quite sunny and a bit more cheerful looking than we anticipated. And we obviously didn't have the resources to, sometimes if you're a big film, you can control the weather, you can bring in a fog machine, or you can put silts overhead to block out the sun and make it look cloudy. But we couldn't do that. And so the DP, Stephen, and I, we were initially a bit disappointed about that. But, ultimately, I think, and this is about kind of part of any kind of filmmaking, but especially indie filmmaking, is that you work within your limitations. And ultimately, I really think that what we thought was a bit of bad luck turned into good luck, because I think it helps the film. It helps create a feeling of contrast, and I think is important, because ultimately it was not my intention to reduce these people's lives to one simple idea or one simple tone. And with contrast, you get, you just get more complexity, more texture. And I think that was a really good thing ultimately for the film. But, on this one day that we shot that prison scene, we did get a lovely layer of mist enveloping everything. And it works really well for that moment that Wayland leaves prison. You get a sense of melancholy for all the years that he's lost, and a sense of mystery, a sense of things being covered, being shrouded, that are about to be revealed. And then there's also this idea of water present, the idea that what's old is going to get swept away like a wave. And we link the images of Wayland and Dolores by stitching together 3 shots. So the first shot of the film is her underwater, and then we tilt up, we break the surface of the ocean, a wave comes hurtling towards us, we tilt up to the sky, and then we tilt down to a prison yard. And then we see Wayland walking across the prison yard to his freedom. And, really thanks to our DP, Stephen, and our VFX team doing such great work, it all looks like one seamless shot, but it's 3 shots stitched together. And I think that what this tells the viewer is that Wayland and Dolores are connected, and that both their lives have been on hold for the last 15 years. And now they're ready to break out of this chrysalis, this cocoon that they've been in, and they're ready to metamorphose into something new. So I think that's what the opening sequence does for you. And then in terms of like color palette and all of that, with Marissa Leguizamon, who's our production designer, who actually now totally like hit the big time and is working on Ava DuVernay's superhero pilot Naomi. So she's like really taking off, which I'm so excited about because she's so talented. Yeah, we had discussions with her about keeping the palette really controlled with blues and greens, and really that we drew those colors that we drew, as you said, from the colors of the Pacific Northwest where we shot most of the movie. But then we also wanted to have pops of contrasting colors, the pinks and the warm side of the color wheel, because we didn't want this film to be washed out or depressing or monochromatic as kind of many social realist type films are. We wanted it to be vibrant and full of life and intensity. So Marissa and Eddie, our art director, and Javed, our set deck, they worked really hard on our tiny budget to control the color palette in this way. And that's hard to do on an indie budget, because you don't have the budget to paint stuff the exact shade that you want to paint it, or source the exact right shade of something. You're really going to thrift stores, going to yard sales and getting anything you can. So the fact that we were able to have such a controlled color palette and such a good looking film really on this smaller budget is down to Marissa and her team really working miracles. So that side of things is really a collaboration between the production designer and her team, and the DP and his team, the colorist in post. And I feel very lucky that despite our budget, we were able to control the look of the film. And really you control the look of the film to tell a story. You don't just do it for the sake of it. And I think we were able to do that, and I'm really grateful for everyone pulling together to make that happen.
And your budget allowed for some really strong actors, Pablo Schreiber and Jenna Malone, who are wonderful in the film. And I noticed they're also listed as executive producers. So is that an honorary title, or were there other ways besides acting that they were involved in the production of the film?
Well, yeah. When you bring in actors of the kind of caliber and experience of Pablo and Jenna to a small indie like this, it's a game changer for the film. And I think that's what the exec producer credit reflects. So these two saying yes to Lorelei was really the single most important thing that happened to our movie. So they set the standard for professionalism on set. They have been on so many more sets than I have, and any of us really. And they really took leadership positions in terms of, and it really in terms of fighting to maintain the film's vision and the film's original intentions. And in my first call with Pablo, he said to me he views his job as helping to protect and preserve his first read of the script. So I think, in other words, whatever it is in the screenplay, when he reads it for the first time, that he responds to, that he has a kind of gut reaction to, he wants to protect that down the line from the pressures of production, of budgets, of time constraints. And I really think that the reason the film has been getting some love on the festival circuit is really down to these two really committed performances, which Pablo and Jenna went all in on. I mean, Pablo even drove his trailer from LA, where he lives, to Oregon, and he slept in a field in his trailer for the duration of the shoot to save us some money, on housing costs. And he literally slept in a field at the back of the house where we shot all the family scenes. And, Jenna, this was her first major kind of role after taking some time out to have a kid and raising him as a single mother. And so I really think that she put a lot of herself and her personal experiences into Dolores. And, I don't think I've ever seen her as raw and as intimate as she is in Lorelei. And I'm just astonished as a first-time feature director, and grateful that these actors chose Lorelei. And I think they're just two of the greatest sort of unsung actors of their generation. And I think, part of their motivation in doing this film is to have the freedom, I suppose, to kind of really dig into roles that I really meaty roles. And I think that hopefully that this film has given them the opportunity to really shine. And I'm just super grateful that they came on. I mean, it was the biggest coup for us. So yeah.
Sure. Well, let's stay on actors for a second, because the child actors in this film are just as spectacular. Could you give us a little background into like the casting process for that, what you were looking for, and then also to follow up with that, like how it was on set with them as well?
Well, thank you firstly for saying that, because if the thing I'm most proud of in this movie is just having discovered these three young actors and kind of launching them into the world with Lorelei. It's the thing that makes me really, really happy about this film. So thank you for saying that. And we spent a long time looking for them, is the answer. We spent, we toured kind of summer acting camps and acting theatre camps, and sort of, I even kind of went to summer fairs and would just like look for children in quite a creepy way that I found kind of charismatic. It felt really weird because I'd literally just go to public places where there were lots of people and look at children. And there were some children that are really, that seem to be little leaders, that people seem to listen to, that seem to be magnetic. And you can see that from across a crowd. And I'd go to the parents of those children and give them a flyer, but it felt very weird. And we did, but we did it. Also, Sean Baker, who our producer Kevin has worked with a lot, and who directed the Florida project. This was kind of how he found some of his kids for the Florida project. So I knew that people did that, but it still felt really weird doing it. But we did we did all that, and we looked for many months for these children, and eventually found them. And I sort of going back to Pablo and Jenna and what they sort of brought to the table, aside from their immense performances, was really helping with the kids' performances, because they really helped me with that. Jenna was a child actor herself. She started acting when she was very young. So she really took a leadership position in terms of guiding the kids through the whole process. And she cooked dinner with the kids in the apartment she was staying in before production began, just so that they could bond and do something together as a family unit.
Yeah.
And, during that dinner, she gave them tons of acting advice. Yeah. And one thing that Chancellor, who plays Dodger, keeps telling me that he remembers from that dinner is Jenna said to him, ask lots of questions. Don't be scared to ask questions. And he really took that advice to heart. And he really on set got the clarifications he needed to do his best work. And if I was being woolly or, not clear, he would get a clarification from me. And I think just the ability to ask, not be scared to ask questions, was just a really great piece of advice that she gave them. And also, just in particular scenes, I think of in particular the scene in which Jenim, the youngest child, has to spit at Dolores, their mother, after a row about wearing pants. And, Jenna really, really worked with Parker, who plays Denim, to help them execute that scene. So Parker is just the loveliest, most sweet-natured child. And the idea of doing a scene in which they have to spit at an adult is just really horrific and scary.
Yeah.
And Jenna just turned it into a game. So she'd say to Parker, let's swill that spittle around in your mouth and launch it at me. And then they do it. And she'd say, is that all you've got? Haven't you got any more? And so she really gave Parker permission to do that. And she got spat at so much. But, really that we got that scene is entirely down to her. And then, I think of the scene in which sort of Dodger punches Wayland at the end of the film, and think of how Pablo really showed up for Chancellor in that scene, because acting is reacting in part. And so even when we were shooting Chancellor's coverage and the camera was off Pablo delivered a performance that was 100% engaged, so that Chancellor would have something to react off of, so that Chancellor could work himself up to delivering that punch. And the kids really learned from watching Pablo and Jenna. So when Chance saw that Pablo did that for him, he reciprocated, and he did the same for Pablo, so that Pablo could get to those difficult emotions in that scene. And I think you see in moments like that filmmaking is really sort of really a symphony, a collaboration between all these different parts. And even Sabina Friedman Seitz, who plays Layla in the film, but is also our associate producer in the film, she was really instrumental. So she and I ran little acting workshops for the kids in the weeks leading up to production. And we'd get them to imagine their lives as Dodger and Perry and Denim, and do exercises to kind of loosen their inhibitions and free their imaginations. And I really have Sabina to thank for leading those workshops and giving the kids a kind of boot camp in acting. So, that's why, it's really collaboration. And that's why you hear directors thank people all the time, because, really our job is just to create a sort of space for all these really talented people to do their best work. And it's, it's hard in an indie where there's so much time pressure and so much financial pressure. But my collaborators were really committed and really stayed the course with me. And the kids' parents too, they were on set every day, tireless, taking time out of their jobs, acting as kind of official translators for their children, by which I mean that they kind of interpreted the kids' moods and their emotions for those of us who didn't know the kids as well. And so they really helped us work with that. They know their children better than anyone. So they really helped us. And this is something that people don't talk about, is when you cast the kids, you also cast the parents, and they become an integral part. They should get like credits in the end, because they were such an integral part of our crew. They made their children feel safe and relaxed and uninhibited. And that's just really important. And then, the kids themselves, there are all these people, but then obviously there's the kids themselves, and they just have it. They have the it quality. They have the kind of imagination and the emotional honesty and the intelligence to deliver really good performances. And it was just so disappointing for them when Tribeca got cancelled. Our Tribeca premiere got cancelled because of COVID. They had their outfits ready, they were so excited. And I just really there was this thing I was most sad about when that happened, apart from the state of the world. But I just really hope that they get their moment to shine in the coming months, because they're so good. And they've been so patient as well. A year is a long time in the life of a child, and these kids have been so patient. And thank you for mentioning them. I'm so proud of them.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, they definitely should be. The whole ensemble just works so beautifully. And I have to say that I perked up and immediately wanted to see the film when I knew that Pablo Schreiber was in it, because I've been watching his work for years. And I like it because he always feels like, no matter what, he's living the character, not just playing someone on the surface. Can you talk a bit about how he got into character, and did he stay in playing Wayland during the course of the film?
I think Pablo came to this role primarily as a dad. So on a personal level, first and foremost. So he's got 2 boys, and he, in his private life, he's a dad, and he's a tender, loving dad. And I think he really wanted a role that would showcase that, because he's this huge 6'5" guy. It's hard to sort of express how imposing he is when you first meet him. He's really, he's a big guy, and he plays villains a lot because of that. Has ended up, not in his early career, but has ended up sort of, because of his size, playing sort of tough guys. And with LORELEI, yes, you see him be this sort of bad boy biker guy, but he's also incredibly tender and compassionate and malleable, flexible. He kind of flexes and bends throughout the course of the film, not without resistance, but ultimately it's his willingness to kind of change that makes Dolores's arc possible. And and I think that being able to play a character like that changes, that is complex, that has different shades and different kind of modes throughout the film, was really appealing to Pablo. And he just went all in on it, thank goodness. And I'm so grateful. And I think for him, understanding the physicality of a character is how he starts with the role. So he really just tries to figure out how a character is in their body, and which makes sense when you think, and as a way to sort of accessing their deeper selves, their essence, their soul. And which makes sense when you think about it, because film is a visual medium. We get all our emotional cues in a film visually. So I think for him, physically transforming into Wayland was important. And he's usually really cut and lean, and he's filming, he's out in Europe right now filming Halo, in which he plays Master Chief, and he's like this sort of superhuman being. So he's usually really cut and lean, but he ate a ton of food and I think enjoyed it. He ate a ton of food. So he could had burgers on standby every time we cut. But so he could put on a ton of weight for this film. So he basically looked in this film like a strong guy, strong in the sense that he's been in prison and he spent his time in prison lifting weights. But he's approaching his midlife point. And he's not this Hollywood star who's chiseled and ripped, which is what Pablo usually is. So I think him putting on that weight was really important for him to kind of understand who Wayland was. And then, he rides a motorcycle. He rides a bike, a motorcycle in real life, but he took time out before production began to hang out with some members of a real life MC, a real life motorcycle club up in Oregon, and really get an insight into their lifestyle and their values. And just took the time out to do that and hang out with these guys and just, observe them and, how they talk, how they hold themselves, and how they kind of, express their masculinity, and he, just sort of spent time with them, and so he really, committed. And I think, I keep talking about commitment, but it's really about sort of going all in on something and kind of not being tentative, and really just diving into the role, diving into the character, and which I think is just really brave, but especially because I'm a first time feature film director. I mean, I've done shorts before, but this is my first feature, and it's always a risk as an actor, and I'm just really grateful that Pablo took a chance on me, and Jenna.
I wanted to switch over to Jenna then as well, playing Dolores. Originally, I was going to say I don't want to give away too much of the ending, but since we're already talking about the ending and her mermaid transformation, I kind of just want to know, like, how were you able to film those? Like, what was that like, and what was just sort of the practical nature of like how you captured those scenes?
Yeah, Jenna is just the best. Those scenes were heroic. So we shot in a mermaid tank in a real life mermaid bar in Sacramento called the Dive Bar, and I can't tell you how difficult conditions were in that tank. It's really small and claustrophobic, so it's very narrow, and the water is really cold because there's fish that live in the tank and they need that temperature to survive in. And so the tank was cold, the water was cold. And if you're not moving around a lot, you know how cold it can get in the water. And then her legs were, her legs had this were bound together inside this mermaid tail. So she couldn't move normally. And then when you open your eyes underwater, there's zero visibility. I mean, you can barely see your own hand in front of you. There's very poor visibility. And then when you sort of surface to get some air, I mean, she'd hold her breath for as long as possible, but then when you surface to get some air, there were steel beams on the top of the tank. That's how it was sort of constructed. So you had to kind of avoid the steel beams or you'd slam your head on it. So it was really, there were all these like physical obstacles, and it was really tough just as a physical endurance thing. It was really tough. So the fact that she managed to navigate all these physical obstacles and then, deliver a performance that's just, is heart-wrenching, it just hits you in the gut, is kind of incredible to me. And ultimately the reason the film works, the reason the end of the film works, but ultimately the whole film, is because she managed to achieve that. And I think it speaks, what to me that tells me about her is that it speaks to the richness of her imagination, that she's able to tap into that scene, despite having all this stuff physically going on around her and having to deal with all of this physical stuff that for most people, you would just have a panic response and you desperately try and stop yourself drowning. And that would be most people. That's what you'd see on most people's faces. But for her, she was able to kind of send that to the back of her mind and really access these kind of tender, maternal, nostalgic, regretful, longing emotions that kind of really make the end of the film. And it's a mystery to me how she managed to do that. I mean, she's done the Hunger Games, and she's comfortable in her body doing physical stuff. And the head mermaid at the dive bar where we shot, Rachel, had a couple of sessions with her and helped her with her mermaiding skills. But, training as a mermaid is usually like a 6-month process, and Jenna pulled it off in just a few hours. And I'm just in awe. And and I'm also, but that's the least of it. I mean, that's important, but it's her performance, and she created a character. Dolores is a character. She's like a memorable movie character. She's like this unforgettable whirlwind of a personality. And Jenna, that's all her. And that's how intensely sort of she committed to the film. So, the ending is a sort of miracle of her physical acting. But the rest of the film too is just, the intensity of that performance, I think, is really special.
Yeah. And I could tell that too, because she does something in leaving her children behind, even though it's with someone she trusts, that makes you not want to like her. But by that ending scene, when you see all of those emotions play across her face, and you still don't have any idea what would happen after the camera stopped and she gets out of the tank, you're able to live in that moment just through all of the things that are going on, really on all of their faces, interacting between the glass and the bar. It's, well done all around, including your position as filmmaker. I was curious about the Lorelei piece because for people who know the myth, it sets up an expectation that Wayland is going to be led to his doom by a siren. That doesn't really happen, at least not by the time the story ends. And I wanted to talk about whether there were other points in the film where you played with expectations and then didn't fall into them.
I love these questions, by the way. They're so, I mean, they really sort of, because they really sort of get at my intentions in thinking about the film and planning the film and hoping that it's nice when the things that look, it's always interesting when people see things in the film that you didn't see, but it's especially gratifying when people, you know, understand your intentions in making a film. That's just really nice. So thank you. Anyway, I think Wayland does kind of die, kind of like his old self dies, right? And he's able to, you know, reinvent and reimagine himself and become, and crucially become a father in a way he never expected, to kids, you know, who are not his biological kids and who he has to learn to love. And there's this verse in The Tempest that I kept thinking about when I was thinking about the film, and it's such a beautiful verse. And I, you know, to me, it was really foundational in thinking about, you know, the opportunities inherent in loss and death, almost like the death of a father, the death of yourself. And it's the Tempest, and it's full fathom 5, thy father lies, of his bones are coral made, those are pearls that were his eyes, nothing of him that doth fade, but doth suffer a sea change into something rich and strange. And it's so beautiful. And to me, it's just about, the beauty kind of inherent in change and metamorphosis. And if, you know, if there's any certainty in this life, it's the certainty that nothing stays the same. So when I loved hearing you talk about what happens after the end of the film. And, you know, when I get questions about whether it's a happy ending or not for this family, I say that, as you put it, that it's a happy moment in their lives, a moment when the children get to see their mother as a sea angel, as a deity almost, and that this will be something that they will always remember. It will be a defining moment for them. And whatever happens after that moment, whether the family stays together or not, that at least they will always have that moment and that image of her in their heads. And in terms of like subverting expectations, I think the main thing that I've encountered as this film has made its way in the world is, I think the thing that surprises people, sometimes people like it and sometimes they don't, is the mix of realism and magical realism in the film. So the mix of genres, if you will. And some people think that the dreamlike elements of the film are kind of maybe at odds with the blue collar theme, which is interesting. And I, you know, this is a thing that I've encountered that has surprised me. Just the rigidity of maybe that idea, because I call this a kind of blue collar fable. And I wonder why blue collar people shouldn't have fables or legends or dreams. And that's not to say that obviously, you know, it's all down to you as an individual. Obviously, there are problems in society that keep rich people rich and poor people poor. But just that I think that a lot of cinema made about working class people, it isn't made by people from that same background, and that the expectations about what a film about this type of family, about this kind of blue collar community should communicate, those expectations are kind of set by the chattering classes. And, you know, with Lorelei, I sort of spoke my truth about, as someone who grew up in a poor neighborhood of London, but always had big dreams. And, you know, in this case, I translated that into a story about blue collar America. And I suppose the result is this kind of bastard cinematic love child. And but I'd rather try something new and have it feel a bit messy than just, you know, than do something that's formally pure but a bit lifeless. And I don't know, I had someone try to persuade me to make Lorelei. When they saw a cut of it, they said, why don't you make this an ex-con story about the push-pull of Wayland's relationship with the motorcycle club and the lure of crime, and you can go and shoot these extra scenes. And I just, you know, I feel we've seen that before. And I feel that as a woman filmmaker, I kind of play with that narrative a little bit, but then I sort of abandon it in favor of what I think is a more interesting story about Wayland's relationship with Dolores and their shared history of kind of loss and failure, and their kind of roundabout circuitous journey to to redemption. And, ultimately you try and make a film in the image of films that you have fallen in love with in the past. And the films that I love all kind of toy with genre a little bit. They kind of give you that structure. They situate you in a world, and kind of you feel you've got your footing, and then they pull the rug out from under you. And I find that kind of exhilarating and life affirming. Some might find it muddled, but to me, that's what I love in cinema.
I'm in the same boat with you too, especially since we're in the middle of an international film festival right now. That to me just speaks to like, I think that's how Hollywood tends to, well, what genre is that movie? What genre is that movie? It's like, well, watching all these international films, like I love that it kind of can glide between genres or have different elements that I think in your case, they're such perfectly suited in service of the story, because the idea of their dreams, their hopes, like you said before, like their past ideas of themselves and how they're still very much there. And they're even directly talking about dreams in your film. So it never even occurred to me that it was weird at all. Like it was so seamlessly woven into the story that any of the magical stuff, I was along for the ride, I guess. That's what I'm saying. So,
thank you.
So those people are wrong. Excellent work.
Yeah, and I guess that's a good note to end on. I never felt in this film that it was cliched. It was unexpected. It was just the lives of people that you might pass on the street and never give a second thought to, but you took us into a world that was full of all the sound and color that we would wish for in when we're thinking about magic in life. Okay, that's enough.
No, thank you. That's
basically
so nice.
I just wanted to say I love this film. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity to chat and to show the film, to get the film seen. It's been a tough year for independent film, and I think film festivals have really been the lifeblood of independent film this year, and just really, the resilience. LORELEI is a film about resilience, and I think the resilience of film festivals and filmmakers and keeping things going this year has been really important for us and for, I think, the entire sort of independent film sector. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Sabrina. Sabrina Doyle is the writer-director of the feature film LORELEI. You can get more details about that film when you log on to the SIF website, clevelandfilm.org. I'm Dee Perry.
And I'm Aaron Spears.
We want to thank our sponsor for this podcast, Wayside Furniture, keeping it local since 1937. We also invite you to support your local film festival. Please consider a donation to the SIF Challenge Match presented by Cuyahoga Arts and Culture. Our goal is to reach $145,000 this year to support the future of our festival, and we are grateful for any amount you're able to contribute. To donate, please visit clevelandfilm.org. And thank you for listening to SIF Speaks.